All right, as usual, if y'all have any questions, feel free to stop me, jump in, and let's talk about it. I'm sure if you have the question, then somebody else will too. It's kind of weird. I'm just looking at my picture. It looks like I'm a floating head. Shouldn't have worn a black shirt in front of that dark, but whatever. All right, y'all aren't looking at me anyway. So we're looking tonight at chapter 7 of the book, where we look at communication disorders. And as we begin, we're looking at communication disorders. And it reminds me of when my daughters were little. This is my daughters now back in the day. When the little redheaded one that was there was born, and it seemed like she was never going to talk. The little blonde haired there, she started talking super early and just talked constantly, which I think is why the littler one didn't start talking very early, because she didn't need to. Her sister did all the talking for her. And when she did start talking, it was very difficult to understand her. In fact, a lot of times I couldn't understand what she was saying, but her sister loved to interpret for her. She would be mumbling something and I'd say, "Caroline, I don't understand what you're saying." And then Cassidy would say, "Oh, Daddy, she wants milk and cookies." I'd say, "Caroline, is that what you said?" She said, "Uh-huh." So, it was, I think a lot of that was Cassidy just getting what she wanted because she told us that Caroline asked for it. But by age 3 or so, it was apparent that Caroline was having a great deal of difficulty. And so we got her in speech therapy at the local public school. And by the time she started kindergarten, she was much more understandable. I wouldn't say it was exactly correct yet, but much more understandable. Now, the reason I bring a lot of that up is, in addition to having this speech language difficulty, she was also a very gifted child. By age 3, she had taught herself to read with a computer program that we had. And so when it came to kindergarten, she had a marvelous kindergarten teacher that while she was teaching the other kids the letter of the week, she would have Caroline do book reports on chapter books to the kids. So she would do that differentiating depending on what the kids needed. And Caroline needed a much higher level than the other ones. Caroline is my daughter that chose to go to Tarleton before any of us worked there or anything. She chose to go there and went through the honors program there, and then went on to get a master's. And so she's doing fine. But sometimes the start seems like, oh man, are we ever going to get there? So communication disorders can be helped. A lot of good things can come out of them. They don't necessarily indicate that a child is smart. You have it all over the border, from kids who are highly intelligent to kids who struggle greatly, who will have communication disorders. When we look at the definition of a speech or language impairment, it's something like stuttering or impaired articulation. It's a language impairment or a voice impairment which adversely affects a child's educational performance. So we started talking about way back when we first started talking about disabilities, that they had to have, 1, a documented disability, and 2, it had to affect their educational performance. So we have the same thing here in the speech and language impairment. Many kids will go on and go through school with a slight impairment because it has not adversely affected them. However, early on, this is one of the most prevalent disability categories as far as being used by schools to get children's services. There are 4 types of communication disorders. It's articulation, this is how you speak. It's language, the Your use of or your lack of use of language is voice. Um, some kids that they don't really, they don't necessarily make sounds wrong. They just have problems with their voice. I've heard kids before that sound real squeaky sounding, like cartoon mouse or something. Well, that's a voice communication disorder, and it may be cute at the time, but it can end up damaging the vocal cords and that sort of thing. So that's why they work with them on it. And then finally, there's fluency. Some of the people that have communication disorders have a difficult time talking fluently as normal folks do. When we look at the different parts of this, we have phonology. Phonology is the study of speech sounds or phonemes. Morphology, that's the rules governing the use of minimally significant units of meaning. So this is where we start getting into our language rules that are usually taught in English language arts later on. And then we get into the more difficult, complicated, I guess, because we're not talking just about sounds anymore. We're talking about grammar and sentence structure and language rules. And then semantics has to do with the meanings of words. Prevalence, 1.5% of school-age children have a communication disorder, and almost 3% of 3 to 5-year-olds. And that's very interesting because you would think that we were expecting 3 to 5-year-olds to make all the sounds that someone who is older makes. And we're going to talk here in a little bit about at what age certain sounds can and should be made. And we'll see that there's a range, but generally, some sounds are learned earlier and some sounds are more complicated and are not learned till later on. In fact, some of the sounds we're talking about, we don't expect children to make them correctly till they're maybe 8 years old. So why are there nearly twice as many in the 3 to 5-year-olds as there are in school age? You want to take a shot at that? Gonna make me do it all. Okay. Well, one thing is we fix a lot of them. Speech therapists, speech pathologists are able to help kiddos, and a lot of them will be able to be assisted to the point that they no longer need speech therapy or they no longer qualify as having a speech disorder. Others of it, the parents, the family works with them. Some kids just finally pick it up after listening. I had a niece that we used to kid, and we still talk about it because she couldn't make the S sound. And she did this weird substitution. Instead of saying the S sound, she substituted the H sound for it. My mother used to talk about the way she called my mother Meemaw, and she used to talk about the way that she would say to her, Meemaw, I want to go hemming. I don't have my hemming hoot. So that's a substitution error where they're substituting one sound for another sound. And when I heard that kid talking, I thought, man, is she, what's wrong here? But again, she's a perfectly normal, you would never know she had a speech issue at all now as an adult, and never affected her in school. She got over it. So a lot of kids start off having these issues and then figure it out. When we get into causation, it's just like so many of these other areas that we've looked at. We don't really know the causes. We know that a bunch of correlations. We do know that sometimes it can be caused congenitally, that it's acquired during prenatal development. It can be acquired. It could be, and when it is acquired, after birth, It could be the result of a traumatic brain injury. Could be something that's inherited. Could be a misshapen or something formed differently in the mouth. You've heard of cleft palates and things like that. It could be one of those sorts of issues. And it could be functional, learned, environmental, or psychological. I've told you before that I have a something called a lateral lisp. When you make an S sound, you spit it out the front, it comes straight off your tongue. When I make an S, unless I really think about it, my S's go the side of my tongue toward my cheek and then out my mouth. And that's why sometimes they're muddled sounding. And it it was not something that was looked at early on. When I was in middle school, they did have a speech therapist working with me, trying to get me to stop doing it that way. And they worked with us a lot on all sorts of different skills, trying to strengthen my tongue and these different things. I remember one of the things they did was make me eat goldfish crackers and then swallow them without closing my mouth. So to swallow without closing your mouth, you have to use your tongue to seal everything up. So that was one of the things they did, trying to make my tongue stronger, I guess. And although some of the time I can really think about it and make it correctly, I normally just revert back to the way that I've done it all my life and do that lateral lisp. So that I guess I learned to make my S's wrong. And, when kids are learning to speak, we don't usually go, oh, quit that, quit. Molly. That is my dog scratching. And when she scratches, she likes to hit the floor. And when she does, it's annoying. Sorry. So normally when a kid's making a sound, as long as the sound comes out sounding okay, we don't really think about how they are, putting their mouth or where their tongue is and those sorts of things. So I probably learned to make it wrong. And then by the time that they started trying to correct it, it was too ingrained. All right, moving on. Identification. So how do you identify? Well, certainly there are standardized testing instruments that speech therapists and speech pathologists can use. Informal measures. We just hear a kid saying it wrong. And, it's kind of cute a lot of times. A lot of times when they make these sounds incorrectly, it's kind of cute. That whole R thing, my youngest daughter, she couldn't make her R's white. So she talked kind of like Porky Pig. And it's kind of cute for a while. Now, certainly you don't want them still doing that later on. If we look at our chart, the R sound and the L sound should come sometime between the years 3 and 6. So until they're 6 years old, you don't really worry about that a whole lot. You can look at family history. Now, neither of my daughters had this lateral lisp that I do. Don't know why, but they don't, and that's good. But you might look at family history of it may just be an incorrect pronunciation. Sometimes it's not history or family as much as the region. Had a lady that I worked with who, I always thought people that would said ax instead of ask. Hey, I want to ask you a question. She would come to me and say, Clark, I need to ask you. Like, no, it ain't gonna hurt. Don't ask me. And she was from Louisiana, and where she learned to speak, the word ASK was pronounced ax. So it's crazy. She is now a superintendent of schools and earns, I don't know, $150,000, $180,000 a year probably. Still asking questions. So part of his family history. And then there's, of course, professional judgment. What one professional may hear as a problem, another may not see that it's a big issue at all. So there's those issues. And then you also need to think about the linguistically diverse. They say, and I don't know how they know this, they say that every child can make every sound. But at some point, if they don't ever use those sounds, they may lose the ability to use that. I am a fairly fluent Spanish speaker, but I cannot roll my R's. I wish I could. Never learned to do that. I had a Spanish teacher who taught me that if you will say butter up, butter up, butter up, butter up, butter up all the time, then that will teach you to roll your R's. And all I did was annoy everybody by saying butter up a lot. Never did learn to roll my R's. So sometimes it has to do with linguistical diversity. All right. If you open your book, or if you just want to make note, on page 207, it has a table showing what sounds come when. So the P, H, W, M, and N sounds come from as early as before 2 years old, and they should have those sounds pretty well concreted by the age of 3. The B sound, we know they start that one pretty early a lot of times because they get that ba ba thing. Want my ba ba. Well, that can be from before the age of 2 up to the age of 4. So we don't think that needs to be concreted quite as early. Then the D, K, and G sounds. Those are normally going to come a little later, probably not going to come till the child is 2, but they still should be fairly concrete by the age of 4. And it's interesting because we hear a lot of kids who their parents swear that their first word is dada, and mama is not happy that kids saying dada. When that dada sound normally doesn't come until age 2, while the M sound for mama comes it's one of the first sounds that normally comes. And not every kid does this, learns these sounds in this order, gets them concreted in by then. But this is a general rule to go by. F and Y, sometime after the child is 2, but before they're 4. T and the NG sound is in running, sleeping. That should be by the beginning, or again at about age 2, and should be concreted by age 6. So see, there's a huge span there between age 2 and age 6 that some kids acquire those sounds. The next, the RL sound, that one begins usually, you're not going to get those concreted in before the age of 3, but you want them there before the age of 6. Then that S sound, that can be so problematic. The span on that is age 3 to age 8. So that's huge span of years that it could be for the child to get those words in. And right after that, you get those combination, the sh and the ch sound after age 3 up to age 7. Then the Z sound follows after age 3 up to age 8. J, 4 to 7. V, that's a strange one. V, you put your lower lip up to your teeth. And that was age 4 to age 8. So again, a large spread and fairly old on that. Then the TH with no voice, like the word thin, age 4 to age 7. The TH with voice, like the word then, hear the difference? Thin and then. The first one, the thin, age 4 to age 7. The as in then, ages 5 to 8. So probably a year later. And then the last one that comes, they say is the last sound to get is that ZH sound that comes in the middle of a measure, not necessarily at the end of a word, but in the middle. And that they don't expect till age 6, and it can be up to age 8 before that one's really concreted in. So that helps us know when to expect what sounds. That's a neat chart to keep handy. And, it's in our book. You can also Google it. But as you're rearing your kids and you're wondering, when are they ever going to learn to say that right? Do I need to get them help, or is it going to come around? This chart really helps kind of know what should be happening about when. And certainly kids don't have a template or a owner's manual. They're gonna pick it up when they pick it up. So as long as they're progressing, I wouldn't worry about it a whole lot, but it might help you feel better to take a look at this if your child is struggling, or somebody whose children are struggling, or if you're going to be teaching early elementary, to kind of know which sounds to be looking for when. All right. As far as articulation disorders, you do have that substitution like we talked about with my niece, but a real common one is the W sound instead of the R sound. So wabbit instead of rabbit. And you get the omission where sounds are left off. Here we have a child that leaves the R or the R sound out, and he says bound ache when he's asking for a brown rake. You have a distortion, which could be a lisping. The sun is up in the sky, where they replace the S sound with that TH sound. And then you have what they call an addition, where they put in an extra syllable, a black horse. And one of the issues with that can come about in causing that is sometimes those blends are hard to say, like the blah blah sound is hard to say. So it's actually easier to say black. Then you're making the buh sound and then the la sound instead of trying to blend the b, the buh, and the la together, and it makes blah. It's interesting. One of the things that early childhood teachers and then on up through pre-K and kindergarten often do is they will repeat a letter a lot in order to help the kids get that letter down in their heads. I walked into a classroom one time and I was observing in this classroom, and the kids were working on a color sheet, and it was a little sea creature with pinchers. And one of the little boys says to the other little boy, "Quab." And the other little boy said, "No, not quab. It's lobster." So he was having a great deal of difficulty getting that C and R combination, the cr blend together. And part of the reason was that skill wasn't to come yet. It was too early for that. They were working on the L sound, which is one of the early ones to come by age 3 to 6. And so it was a interesting thing to witness, and it helped me see some of this for myself on what the kids were working with and why the teachers were doing part of what they were doing. All right. Change slide, please. Well, decided to stop doing that. So let's try again. All right. I think we're back in business. Hopefully it will keep up this time. Okay, so in our language disorders, we have receptive or expressive. Receptive disorders are when we're not understanding, we're not receiving it correctly. I told you about my grandson whose receptive language was very good, but he had almost no expressive language. As far as phonology, difficulty with intelligibility for sure. No rhyming, no blending. Uh, the morphology, the syntax, verb endings. You know, a lot of times you'll have a kid who conjugates verbs incorrectly, or not at all. You know, they will learn one form of a verb and just stick with that form. I run tomorrow, I run home yesterday, I run, you know, um, where they don't have the tenses or any other endings on it. I am run instead of I am running. Those are morphology and syntax errors having to do with expressive language. Then the semantics, difficulty following direction or paraphrasing or using figurative language. And then the pragmatics of it, trying to express ideas or understanding others. And as I told you about him, which you may or may not have seen that video or been here that night, uh, his receptive was very good. He understood most of everything that was going on, but when he tried to put it out, he couldn't make the sounds. So he ended up almost like playing charades with him, trying to convince you of what he was trying to get across. He's been working with speech language pathologists for a few years now, and it's much better. We also look at issues like fluency, and sometimes these are issues with stuttering, and a lot of times that's a fluency issue. They're trying to buy time there, or sometimes it's cluttering. They get moving so fast that they start putting extra words in there that just because the thought and the expression are not coming out at equal rates. You have voice quality, pitch, loudness that may be inappropriate. I don't know if you've ever heard a kid that just, it's like they're yelling all the time. Uh, Sometimes it's the pitch is really ear piercing, high pitched sounds. And these can be inappropriate for an individual's language, age, gender, cultural background, their location. We're actually going to have some videos of one of these that is very popular these days that we'll get to in just a few minutes. This can be organic, it could be physiological in nature, or it could just be functional, improper or inefficient use of the vocal mechanism. So the first one we're going to look at is what they call upspeak. Don't tell me that. All right, let's try. See if we can get there a different direction. And that's going to be the fun part. All right, maybe it's about to come. All right, hopefully I put this in right. We'll see what happens. Come on, please. Slowly but surely. Well, not surely, just slowly. Okay, I'm gonna stop that one because the other one is the better one. And if we gotta wait for one, we might as well wait for the good one. Hey, are y'all seeing that? Are y'all seeing the YouTube window?
I'm
No,
not
we're
understanding that.
You're not seeing. Okay.
America's young women are running out of oxygen. What else could explain why so many of them sound like this?
Okay, are you seeing that video now?
No.
No.
We can see it now.
Yay.
So cute, so cute. Which is kind of like my, motto.
Kim and Chloe just don't get it.
Believe it or not, there's a scientific term for the way a Kardashian speaks, and it's vocal fry. It's a low, creaky vibration produced by a fluttering of the vocal cords. Speech pathologists call it a disorder that verges on vocal abuse, and here's what it looks like. Call it a quirk, a trend, or an epidemic. Vocal fry is everywhere.
I'm not staying here tonight.
The only reason why I'm going is just to like network.
A recent study of women in college found that 2/3 of them use this glottalization, which explains why the fry is a sizzling topic in the New York Times. On morning TV, sounds something like this. Even for an NPR host.
It's annoying. I mean, it's really annoying.
When I was a tween in the early 80s, the Valley Girl was born. She brought us like and uptalk. And there's been like a general cultural agreement that like that kind of speech leaves the user sounding airheady and unprofessional. But vocal fry is unique because researchers have found that women who talk this way are seen by their peers as educated, urban-oriented, and upwardly mobile.
You bluff him, and he totally complimented you.
Some linguists even suggest that creaky young ladies are evolving our culture as linguistic innovators.
Tyler has a pretty good reputation in this business.
Well, metaphorically, I encourage every woman to find her voice. I'm dismayed at how low it can go.
On my 16th birthday.
I'm burned out on the fry. It sounds underwhelmed and disengaged. It's annoying to listen to a young woman who sounds world-weary and exactly like her 14 best friends.
All right. Anybody heard that? Y'all have any friends that talk that way? I know you wouldn't do that. Y'all still here?
I mean, I've heard it on TV, but I don't think I know any. I was sitting here thinking, do I know anybody that talks like that in actual life? And I don't think I know anybody who talks like that.
Really? Interesting.
Or maybe I just haven't given it any thought because we're so used to it now.
You know, I think you're onto something there. It's gotten so commonplace that I think we hear it so much that it's like, what's the big deal? The other one was talking about uptalk, which is where instead of going down at the end of a sentence, you go up at the end of a sentence. I didn't do that very well, but you know, usually if we're asking a question, do you like my dog? We will go up at the end of the sentence. But when we're making a statement, we don't do that. But in uptalk, you actually go up even at on a statement, not just on a question. So these are ways that are, you know, I'm not necessarily saying they're disorders. However, they did talk about with the vocal fry that it is hurting the somewhere back there. I don't know if it's the voice box or exactly where, but they did say they did in other studies I've seen, so it actually does hurt the speaker. All right, moving on. So we have a child with a communication disorder. What do we need to do? Well, we got to look at how is the student impacted instructionally. If the child needs additional help, then a lot of times you're not just going to send the kid out for 30 minutes once a week to see a speech therapist. You're going to work with the teacher on how to work with that kiddo and help them throughout the week. You can see how that would be much more effective where a teacher that's with this child, you know, 30 hours a week versus 30 minutes a week from one speech therapist. So you look at how they are impacted instructionally, and then look at what the child's IEP asks for. Certainly, a lot of times we just need to model. One of the things we need to do is to model correct speaking. when you hear a child say something incorrectly. We talked about how cute it is when a little kid does that RL substitution thing. But by the time that kid gets into fifth grade, it's not cute anymore. And the child is going to be subject to being ridiculed. So we want to model speaking correctly, work with the child on self-talk, parallel talk. Okay, I say something and then you say it back to me. And then the close procedure that the book talks about is an excellent way to help the kid get better in practicing these skills. And that's really all that these things are about, is learning the skills, having the skills modeled for them, and letting them practice those skills. We also want to make sure that our classroom is a language-rich environment. When we talk about a language-rich environment, it goes back to that whole idea of whether the teacher is the sage on the stage or the guide on the side. And current thinking is that we're better off to be the guide on the side, let the kids take ownership of their own language and their own learning. So if we have a language-rich environment in our classroom, then we speak to the kids and the kids speak to us and the kids speak to each other. And we can maintain all of this in a way where they are still actively engaged in the learning. In my parents' day, my grandparents' day especially, the kid at school was not to speak unless it was spoken to. My grandmother continued that mantra throughout her life. I cannot tell you how many times I would walk up to my grandmother and go to say something to her, and she would say, "Clark, children are to be seen and not heard. The adults are talking." Well, you don't ever hear that anymore. We expect the kids to talk, and we expect the kids to join in the conversation that's going on. I'm not sure that's always the best thing, but in classrooms, certainly, if we are guiding them in a language-rich environment, then that is a good thing. How much do we worry about whether they're speaking correctly or not? Well, you're going to need to be the judge of that and the guide on that as well. Sometimes the kid needs to speak, even if the kid is saying it incorrectly, just because they're so reluctant to speak that we want to reward each time they make an attempt. There's also instructional technology out there now. Some kids' communication disorders are so bad that they basically cannot talk. We used to call that a condition as being mute. We would talk about someone being a deaf mute. They could not hear, they could not speak. Well, we've learned that most of the time kids who are deaf are not mute. They certainly can speak. They just can't hear what sounds to replicate, so they don't make the sounds. But there's augmentative technology that can supplement the language that the child has, or there's alternative communication where if a child does not have much language at all, that through they have little keyboard like things that will say the words as the kids type them in. And when I say type them in, we're usually not talking where they spell things out. This is stuff that kids can do before they're able to type, before they even know their letters. It can be based on pictures even. But we always want to make sure that we are rewarding attempts. One of my grandsons was pretty little. We were working with him on using his words, and he liked to just go and grab what he wanted to get. And we always told him, use your words, and we'll, ask people to help you. And he really liked, my wife usually keeps a jar of M&Ms by her chair. And he really likes that candy jar full of M&Ms. One day he walked over toward that jar and he pointed at it and he said, "Need help that." Well, certainly not a complete sentence, but we all got his meaning, and he was rewarded for that, of course, by getting M&Ms. So you want to help them along. Most kids are going to come around and be able to get it by themselves. Others will need either augmentative or alternative communication. And these can be very complex or very simple. I don't know if you've got an iPhone and done the latest update on the iPhone. It now has a translator where you just speak into it and choose what language you want it to come out, and it will come out that way. It's not anything you have to buy. It's just right there on the iPhone software. So those sorts of technological advances are continuing to come along, and they can help our kids that are having issues like that. That takes care of our book for the night. Are there any questions anybody wants to deal with? Or